Welcome to the show that focuses on Mother Africa. It's always a pleasure to have you with us. This week we speak to Bob Collymore, the CEO of Safaricom Limited. We get his views on corporate responsibility, leadership and development in Africa. We get your views on the issues as well. And as always, we have Africa's top 10. You're watching the Africa Leadership Dialogues. I'm Julie Gichuru. Robert William Collymore, better known to many simply as Bob Collymore, was born in Guyana but moved to the United Kingdom at 16 years of age. He was appointed Chief Executive Officer at Safaricom Limited in November 2010. Prior to this, he served as Chief Officer of Corporate Affairs at Vodacom Group Limited, and before that, as Purchasing Director for the UK business of Vodafone. He spent much of his career in the telecommunications industry and has also served as a Governance Director for Africa at Vodafone. Let's get his insights into business in Africa, leadership and development. Thank you so much, Bob, for making time for the Africa Leadership Dialogues. It's been 5 years now, I think, at the helm of Safaricom. It's a company that has been celebrated as one of the most innovative in Africa. But let's start with the challenges and the leadership lessons. What has been most striking for you over the past 5 years?
Lots. I'm not sure it's that easy to single out anything. But I think the role of business in the broader agenda, I think businesses are now beginning to understand that they have a role to play, and it's not everything should be left to government or to civil society or to NGOs. And I think that's one of the major shifts that I've seen in the 5 years. Corruption is a classic one. We've kind of washed our hands of corruption, although of course as a community, businesses are deeply embedded in corruption.
So let's go to the first point that you've raised. And, it's this debate and discussion around not just doing good business, but business doing good. Do you think African businesses or businesses operating in Africa are starting to get it? And are they doing enough?
They're starting to get it, and they're not doing enough. Okay. If you look at sustainability reporting, there are very few companies that are currently doing it. People don't understand what sustainability is. They tend to think about it in the context either of climate change, or they think about it in the context of CSR, that horrible phrase, corporate social responsibility. And corporate social responsibility usually sits in a department somewhere. It isn't as deeply embedded in businesses as it should be. And if you look at the 4 pillars of climate change, of human rights, labor rights, and ethics and corruption, you'll see that if businesses don't get their heads around that space, we're going to have a problem. As a continent, we often talk about Africa rising and a new dawn for Africa, and it could be a new dawn for Africa, but we could also fail miserably if we don't deal with some of those issues.
Failing miserably has huge implications for the continent, and perhaps we'll go into that in a short while. If you had a message for corporate leaders across Africa, what would that be?
Think about your business not in the short term. Not just corporate Africa, the corporate world tends to think of their business according to the quarterly reporting cycle or the half-yearly reporting cycle or the annual reporting cycle. You have to think about your business the way Unilever thinks about its business. And I often single out Unilever because it's a company that's been around for 120 years or so. It's a long time. And when you talk to the leadership in that company, Paul Polman will tell you that he wants to leave a legacy which is a company successfully managing 120 years from now. So business leaders, I would really urge them to really think about the long term. And if you're going to think about the long term, you have to think about the challenges facing the continent. You have to think about 30% of our youth are illiterate. And that's a problem. if you look at manufacturing, manufacturing only represents 9% of the continent's GDP, right? So, but agriculture, on the other hand, which represents 20%, uses 80% of the workforce. And it's not good quality work. You know, if you compare that to jobs that are being created in Europe or in the US, you know, it's not agriculture where you're trying to farm half an acre. And so, you know, we have to address those issues as a business community.
So there's a lot of rethinking and reframing that needs to happen, and particularly with agricultural conversations about scaling up and making sure we move farmers from subsistence to some kind of prosperity. Interesting conversations. We talked about the challenge, and you know, you said, you know, we could fail if we don't focus. If we fail, that means for Africa continued poverty, desperation, loss of hope. We're seeing an increase in radicalization. What would your message to African leaders at this point then be?
So the first thing is I would define African leaders, because we often think about African leaders as being the political class. And the political class is a very short-term class. Typically, it's less than 5 years. The first year, you're settling into the job. The last year, you're preparing for election. You know, in Kenya, people are already preparing for election, which is ludicrous. Business leaders, on the other hand, have set an institution which has a long way to go. So when we talk about leaders, we have to talk about public and private sector leaders. Then the second thing I'd say is that you think about responsibility. Think about dealing with the issues that the continent faces. You know, we talked about youth, you know, the so-called youth bulge or youth challenges which are coming. You know, think about 92 out of every 1,000 children failing to reach their 5th birthday. Think about, you know, the continent is home to about 2% of the world doctors, but 14% of the world's population.
Shocking, shocking.
We have to have a healthy, an educated, and an economically empowered continent if we are to avoid that. I don't want to be a prophet of doom, because actually I'm an African optimist.
Okay.
I really believe that the continent will ride it, but I do believe that we need to step up as leaders, business and private and public sector leaders.
So speaking of leaders stepping up, you came into office at the helm of Safaricom, and the Horn of Africa was facing an incredible drought. And you stood up and literally held the hand of the Kenya Red Cross, harnessed networks and pulled corporates and government along and asked Kenyans to get involved in being part of the solution. Kenyans for Kenya was born, an incredible initiative that I think set the pace for Africa in many ways. But then there are those who might say, hold on a minute, government has a responsibility here. By harnessing all this energy around this, you're allowing government to get away with not doing what they should be doing. Others say, incredible, unprecedented, a new way forward. How do you respond?
Yes, people often talk about private sector solutions to public sector problems. And we see it here in South Africa. You see the security issue being addressed by the private sector by simply putting up bigger walls and hiring you know, private security agencies for dealing with these issues. So of course, you know, government does have a role to play. But I think what Kenyans for Kenya taught us was the concept of leveraging social capital. We often leverage our financial capital as business communities, but actually we have social capital. And so picking up the phone and calling someone, which, you know, Abbas Goulet from the Kenya Red Cross is often doing that. You know, he would often call me and he would say, you know, we have a problem at Chiromo, for example, where the families are there, they're waiting to identify.
This is following the Garissa attack.
This is following the Garissa attack. But lots of occasions where he leverages the social network. Right. And with Kenyans for Kenya, you know, we called you, for example. Yes. And we said, Julie, you know, we need some help. And you said, sure. And you know, I have some great examples of you know, my friend Jacqueline Novogratz, who does exactly that. Jacqueline doesn't leverage financial capital. She uses the relationships she's got to build a coalition, and those coalitions across the public sector, across NGOs, across civil society, when those things come together, they really really make a difference. If you look at the First Lady of Kenya, look at the way she's been leveraging a social network in order to roll out those mobile clinics.
Absolutely, and just a reminder, First Lady's initiative obviously is Beyond Zero, seeking to end maternal deaths in Kenya, and Jacqueline Novogratz founded the Acumen Foundation. You can find out more about that online, and it's actually operational in many parts of the world, including across East Africa.
It's very big in East Africa.
It is very,
and in particularly
yes.
in Kenya.
Yes, it is. Social capital, something that we just don't leverage enough. I think a big lesson for a lot of people. Moving on to your personal background, born in Guyana, you've lived in various parts of the world and worked in various parts of the world. Now you've been in Africa for a good amount of time. What's your connection to the African continent?
You know, when I reflect back to when I was a child, it was very little different. You know, the West Indies and Guyana was very little different to Ghana or to Kenya. You know, we grew up with the same kind of challenges to access to hygienic water. Challenges, you know, we shared a toilet with a small community of 4 or 5 houses, I think. And so when I see that here, it's easy for me to relate to it.
To connect.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I understand the challenges and the excitement of being that child. And I have to say that growing up as a child in Guyana was, in a lot of ways, a lot more exciting than growing up as a child with an iPad.
Right.
You know, in today's world.
Feeling of mud between your toes.
Yeah, I often talk about
it.
I often talk about the dust between our toes.
Yeah.
And as a company, you know, I really try to get my team, my leadership team, to get the dust between their toes. I don't really want to see them sitting in the office 5 days a week, because that's not where the customers are. And that's not where society is. And, you know, we try as a company really to try to get beyond just serving the customer. We try to serve the society in which we operate. And so some people will be customers and some will not. Often we find that we would go to a district to commission a borehole or a school or a hospital. And people often say, you know, want to see can you give us a booster? We don't have any network coverage. And so it's, for sure, it's not a good thing that doesn't have network coverage, but it's also a good reflection on where we are, because we're not putting the borehole because we have customers there.
Right.
We're putting the borehole because that's where they need access to clean, hygienic water.
Because it's the right thing to do.
It's the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do.
And Safaricom Foundation has been getting involved in the whole Sustainable Development Goals conversation, along with all the other work that it does. But why? Why are you engaging in the idea of the SDGs and achievement of the SDGs? Is it just pulling on from the social responsibility aspect? What are you hoping to achieve as part of that program?
Well, a kind of small refinement to that is not really Safaricom Foundation that's doing it. It's Safaricom that's doing it. Because often if you put things in foundations, as I said, you often end up compartmentalizing it.
Right.
And we have to embed those things. Now, of course, the SDGs, there are far too many of them. I mean, I'm a big critic of having 17 goals. Even I can't remember them. And some of them are a little bit motherhood and apple pie, you know, let's end poverty. But of course, you know, we have a huge interest in ending poverty across the continent, and more specifically in Kenya, because if you can end poverty, then we will have a more thriving business. If we can deal with that issue, we'll have a much stronger society in which to operate. Even in my own company, if we can deal with gender diversity, and you know, we're 50-50, but it's not uniform across the organization, we will make much better decisions than we would if we were, you know, all female or all male. So it is essential for the corporate world, not just the corporate Kenyan world, the corporate world to embrace these sustainable development goals, because it will just create a more equitable society for us to operate 120 years from now.
Stay with the Africa Leadership Dialogues.
A lot of people watching will be stunned at your story, growing up in Guyana and sharing toilets, and a lot of people here in Africa, as you said, connect to that. What would you say propelled you to success? Are there characteristics or traits that you would encourage young people to embrace?
I think it's about finding a purpose. I heard a lovely phrase the other day that says the two most important days of your life. The first is when you were born, and the second is when you discover why you were born. And I think as a company, we kind of discovered that a good while back, and I'm just lucky to have inherited it from Michael Joseph, my predecessor. But I think we do understand why we're there, and we believe that we're there to transform lives. And not to relieve poverty or suffering, but to transform it. And if we can use ICT and the tools that we have to hand to make a difference and to make a life different, we believe that's what we're kind of there for.
That's a corporate perspective. I'm moving it to Bob now.
It's the same thing. I think it's the same thing. You know, finding out. I think trying to pursue that understanding of what your purpose is really, really important. And I remember giving a valedictory speech at the USIU University, the United States International University, where I said to the young people there graduating that the most important thing for you to do is to find out why. Find your purpose, and then pursue that purpose, not just with a passion, but like an obsession. Right. And I think that's what we do. You know, we believe in that purpose, and we throw everything at it. Of course, we fail sometimes. You know.
Find your purpose and pursue it with a passion. Africa today. You've said you're an Afro-optimist. If indeed we start to get things right, we're starting to see more democratic processes. Nigeria just went through a stable election, transition of power. We do still have some conflicts and insecurity in parts of Africa, but we have economies growing faster than many of the other economies of the world. Where could we be in the next 10 years? What do you see?
So let me just challenge, and this is probably going to be a little bit controversial, but let me just challenge this thing about let's see more democratic
spaces.
More democratic spaces. I'm not sure that that's always necessary. Now, as I said, it's a little controversial. And I'm not sure that we should pursue this concept of democracy at all costs, and that it is always relevant to different societies. We are a continent of 54, depends how you count the countries, but 54 different countries, 54 different cultures, actually a lot more subcultures, and they don't always work. You know, democracy doesn't always work in those societies, and we shouldn't just blindly pursue it. So, I mean, that's my piece of controversy. I think that we can see some states where you might challenge the democratic principles, or whether the democratic principles really are being applied. However, if you say, are those countries successful? Are they achieving some of those important things? Are they reducing maternal mortality rates? Are they improving the health of the nation, the education of the nation? The answer could be yes. And if you look at some states, if you look at places like Singapore, you might question whether Singapore really did embrace democracy in the way that some countries would have them do it. And often I think, sorry to cut you off there, but often I think that some of the bigger states leverage the help and assistance that they offer in order to impose their own political ideology, and I'm not sure it's always the right thing.
It's a brave statement. It's a powerful statement. It's one not often shared by people, because this is an environment where it is politically correct to advocate for more freedom and democratic space. What would your message be?
Well, freedom and democratic space are two different things.
Okay, so freedoms you're all for.
Absolutely.
Some would say they're connected.
In some ways they are connected,
yes.
But you know, we can get this conversation hijacked around the whole democratic space. But you know, let me cut it short there and just say that I don't think that it's always relevant.
Okay, and I think that there are certainly lessons to be learned across North Africa.
Yes.
And Africa is learning, hopefully, some of the consequences of our revolutions that are not strategically thought out and followed through.
Yeah, I would much rather see us put more focus on dealing with the fact that out of the 20 worst performing countries on corruption, 15 of them are in Africa. Let's try and deal with that issue. Let's try and deal with modern day slavery. Rather than focus on political ideology. You know, 15 African countries are today practicing modern day slavery. Let's try and deal with child rights. Let's try and deal with all those other issues. And then we can come to democracy when we get to the state of evolution. But, Europe didn't jump into democracy rights from the beginning, right? Democracy is actually a fairly modern concept. And even if you go back 200 years, Europe wasn't there.
Powerful points. Share your views on these issues. Let's go back to Safaricom and the future for the company. So there's so much going on in the digital space. TV, media is moving more and more onto digital platforms. You've seen the transformation in many countries, East Africa, West Africa. What is the future for Safaricom, both in terms of scope? Will you be moving further across borders and in terms of operations as well?
It's a question which is often asked. Are we going to extend beyond Kenya? And the answer is not now, and not in the foreseeable future. We don't have any plans. Will we be extending into adjacent sectors? And you've talked about a couple of them. We've extended into the money sector, into the financial sector. And that's been kind of reasonably successful. Highly
successful. It's very modest to say reasonably successful.
I think we can always do
transforming banking.
Well, we're transforming. We don't think about it in terms of transforming banking. We think in terms of it of transforming people's lives. Okay. And if we can use whatever tools we have to do that, then that's great. And if that can drift us into the provision of more information and more knowledge. So let me give you an example. We do some work with Green Dreams in Kenya called iCow. And iCow is providing information to farmers using a basic telephone.
Right.
Information to farmers, and those farmers are now seeing their yield improve by between 30 and 50%. And Sue Kahumba will give you, no ends of testimonials from farmers who simply get the information. And we think we can drift into that agricultural space to transform their lives. How do you move farmers from subsistence? Creating farming jobs is not what we should be doing. We should be creating, agro-processing. Do you know coffee? Let me give you an anecdotal here. Germany exports more coffee than the whole continent of Africa. Of course, Germany doesn't grow any coffee. But let me give you another. Switzerland, the value of Swiss coffee exports is twice the value of German coffee exports. So why aren't we doing that value addition with coffee and with tea and with all those other things to keep the value on the continent? Why are we just talking about the exportation? When we look at the modernization of the Mombasa ports, for example, why are we modernizing it? We're modernizing it so we can import more stuff.
Right.
But we should be modernizing it
to export,
so we can be exporting more finished and processed goods.
Let me ask you this, Bob. Where does the greatest responsibility lie? Is it with the public or with the private sector?
The public sector is there to create an enabling environment. And, we have lots of good examples of that in Kenya. We also got some bad examples. But, we talked about revolutionizing finance, the finance sector in Kenya. There we had a governor who really got it and wanted to create that environment, which has allowed, in our case, M-Pesa to thrive. But in the banking sector, the growth of agency banking has been fantastic, which brings financial inclusion to a lot more Kenyans. So that's the role of the public sector. The private sector then needs to just take its responsibility, see it through the right lens. Don't see it through the short-term lens. See it through the right lens. And if you can do that, then you realize that, well, the first thing you realize is the real difference you can make, the real impact you can make. And you can stop worrying about whether the board will fire you because the numbers aren't right. The board will actually get the fact that it's much better to be a board 10, 15, 20 years from now than just delivering fantastic results for the quarter.
See it through the long-term lens as well.
Always the long-term lens. And it's an odd thing that the older we get as a species, the more we start to think about the long term. Whereas, I wish that I had that kind of long-term view when I was younger. But now, as my candle gets towards the end, I'm thinking of, how can we
Perhaps that's the lesson for our young viewers, is start to see it through the long-term lens, rather than the short-term thinking that it's so easy to adopt when you're young and vibrant and have lots of energy. As we come towards the end of the interview, Bob, really, we'd love you to deliver a personal message to Africans at whatever level. How can we all be part of uplifting the African continent? Please look into the camera.
You know, I was having breakfast with a European this morning, and we talked about Africa, the continent. And I said to her, can you draw the continent of Europe? Draw a map of the continent of Europe. And of course, she couldn't do it. You ask anybody to draw the map of Africa, and they can do it. And if you look at that within the context of unification, if we can start to really think the way we think about that map, let's start to think as Africans, because otherwise it's impossible for us to compete with India, with China. The Human Development Index, we had the same Human Development Index as India and China in 1970. Today, China is 30 percentage points ahead of the continent. So let's start to think like Africans, not like Zambians or Kenyans or South Africans, not like Kikuyus or Luos or whichever tribe you might belong to. Think as a continent, act as a continent, and take responsibility for your continent, because it's yours, it's no one else's.
It's amazing. Thank you so much, Bob.
You're welcome.
Stay with the Africa Leadership Dialogues.
Hi, my name is Bob Collymore, and you're watching the African Leadership Dialogue.
What a fascinating interview, and really focus on the importance of sustainability and the importance of business ensuring that it is doing good in the communities within which it operates. Well, it's time now to get your views on the issues.
This week we asked you, how can African governments create and sustain an environment conducive for innovation? Brenda Kanaiza says, by providing platforms where innovators get the opportunity to showcase their innovations. Also by allocating funds to support the best innovations and nurturing or mentoring the upcoming innovators.
Hi, my name is Experience Munguti, and we're watching African Leadership Dialogue in Nairobi. African governments can create and sustain an environment conducive for innovation by, first, putting in place policies which are responsible for growth. Secondly, they should also support development parties in strengthening national innovation policies in the continent.
To join our conversation, go to our G+ page, Africa Leadership Dialogues, on Facebook, Africa Leadership Dialogues, on Twitter, @AfricaLD, and on WhatsApp, send your video comments to +254 715 816 033.
And now to Africa's Top 10.
On Africa's Top 10 this week, we feature governments that procure advanced technology products. This research looked into the extent in which government purchasing decisions foster innovation. This is according to the World Economic Forum. Starting us off at number 10 is Kenya with an index of 3.71. It is positioned at number 49 globally. Coming in at number 9 is Seychelles with an index of 3.74 and is ranked at number 46 globally. Botswana comes in at number 8 with an index of 3.77 and is ranked at number 45 globally. At number 7 is Cameroon with an index of 3.85 and is ranked at position 41 globally. Slotted in at number 6 is Côte d'Ivoire with a global ranking at position 38 and an index of 3.87. Positioned at number 5 is the island nation of Cape Verde, which attained an index of 3.91. It is ranked 36th globally. Taking the number 4 spot is the Gambia with a global ranking at position 32 and an index of 3.98. Senegal comes in at number 3 with an index of 4.02. It is ranked 27th globally. At number 2 is Zambia. The Southern African state is ranked 25th globally with an index of 4.06. And at number 1 this week is Rwanda. The East African nation is ranked 5th globally with an index of 4.8. And that's Africa's Top 10 this week.
We end as always with words of wisdom. This African proverb goes, "You can tell a ripe corn by its look." There is no doubt that Africa is ripe, but we must take the right steps to ensure that we are moving forward productively, progressively, and not destructively. Blessings to you and blessings to Africa.